On this week's Lazy Sunday Upload is the one and only Jordan Peterson. Now, the clip you're about to see is cut from a much longer 1 hour, 50-minute presentation and Q&A session at which Peterson was awarded a POGG, Peace, Order and Good Government Award in Ottawa. In this clip, Peterson elucidates the frightening and far-reaching effects of the now infamous Bill C-16 of the Ontario Human Rights Code. Peterson speaks with a passion and intensity that few people do, and that makes him, in my opinion, all the more watchable. Enjoy.
The first people to go are going to be the psychiatrists. They have an anti-psychiatry program in Boise. Right? They already have one. And they have a program on social justice. And the second most dangerous organization in Canada after the Ontario Human Rights Commission is the Ontario Institute for the Studies of Education, because they are not producing teachers. They are producing dedicated propagandists. And they are teaching social... They're teaching the tenets of radical social constructionism to your children. And I mean this technically speaking. So social constructionism is a doctrine that's derived both, I would say, from Marxism and from postmodernism, that insists that human identity is nothing but a social construct. And you need to insist upon that if you're a utopian, because if there's anything to human identity other than a social construct, right, a consequence of socialization, then you can't indefinitely modify human beings into your utopian ideal. And so the Soviets and the Maoists were radical social constructionists, technically and philosophically speaking, insisting that human beings were infinitely modifiable. It's a blank slate idea. Now, the idea that human beings is a blank slate, that is not a tenable scientific hypothesis. That hypothesis was, I think, thoroughly dispensed with in the 1960s. The behaviorists pushed it pretty hard and quite nicely, but their own behavioral investigations indicated quite quickly, because they were genuine scientists, that human beings had an intrinsic nature, and that's well documented in psychology and biology. But I think that proposition, I truly believe this, I'm not trying to be alarmist, I truly believe that proposition is now illegal. And the reason I believe this is because the policy guidelines on the Ontario Human Rights Commission website state explicitly that biological sex, gender identity, gender expression, and by the way, gender expression is nothing other than your fashion choice. And I'm not being a smart aleck about this. It says right on the Ontario Human Rights Commission website that it's the manner that you present yourself in dress and hairstyle when doing day-to-day things like working and going shopping. That's actually what it says. That's the policy guidelines on the Ontario Human Rights Commission website. It's what you wear and how you do your hair when you go shopping. And criticizing that now is a hate crime in Canada. So congratulations to us. So anyways, we've instantiated a social constructionist dogma into the law. Good luck, biologists. So today, for example, when I was at this debate, I'm an expert in some areas of gender differences in personality. It's part of my research. My lab has done some of the fundamental work in that area. When we demonstrated, for example, that there are very fundamental differences in personality between men and women, enough so that if you sum the differences across all the different traits, you can almost segregate men and women completely without knowing their biological sex, so the differences are quite profound. All you women, you should be fighting for protection of that, because you have interests, you have feminine interests. Now, some women are more masculine and some men are more feminine, but broadly speaking, women, for example, tend to be much more interested in working with people rather than working with things, and then have the opposite predilection, and that's to be associated with testosterone exposure in utero. It has nothing to do with socialization, or very little. You see the same damn thing among chimpanzees. So, anyways, once you get the social constructionist doctrine embedded into the legislation, it's then, well, you can't discuss biological differences between men and women anymore because it violates the tenets that are instantiated in the law. So what are you going to do? Say, well, there are sex differences between men and women. Wait a second. You can't say that because the doctrine says that gender identity is separate from biological sex. And by the way, it's not, because 99.7% of people have the same gender identity as their biological sex, right? It's a tiny proportion of the transsexual community that debates the relationship between biological sex and gender identity. So it's the psychiatrists first. They've already got rid of Ken Zucker. They have an anti-psychiatry program. And Ken Zucker, like, he's just a scientist clinician. They call him a practitioner of conversion therapy, which was an absolute lie. All Zucker did, basically, was note scientifically, I think 200 of his colleagues signed a letter denouncing the Ontario government for scuttling his career because he's perhaps the most outstanding scholar on the topic in the world. He edits the damn journal where most of this stuff is published. He basically said, well, look, if you take kids who have gender dysphoria, so they're unhappy being boys if they're girls or the reverse, and you just leave them the hell alone, about 80% of them figure out that they're gay, and then by the time they're midway through their adolescence, 90% of them settle into their biological identity. And so his attitude was, hey, let's go a little easy on the hormones and the knives, and just let the kids sort themselves out. That's illegal now. So, for example, if you took your 3-year-old child to the doctor and the child is insisting that that child is the opposite gender, the medical profession has no right, in fact is forbidden by law, to suggest that maybe the child's opinion could be, let's say, put on the shelf for a few years while they work it out. And it is illegal, and if you don't believe me, I can give you a good example of this. So Lauren Southern, the Rebel Media journalist, went to a physician. She's quite a, excuse the expression, she's quite a well-built blonde woman, which is partly why she's attracted so much attention online. She's very attractive and very definitely female. And she moved to Ontario from British Columbia a couple of months ago, and she decided that she was going to go test these new gender laws. So she went to a physician, just a walk-in clinic, and said, put her hair up inside a hat. Didn't really change much, but that's what she did. And she said, look, I've been, identifying as a man for the last year, and so I would like you to write me a note that I'm a man. So the doctor promptly wrote her a note saying that she was a man, and then, which shocked her, and then she took the note and went to the Ontario kiosk where you get your identification, and there was a nonplussed immigrant woman working there, and I don't know what she thought about what was going on, but Lauren said, well, look, now, but this time she's got her long blonde hair up, and she's fully made up, and she's got high heels on, and it's like, she says, I've got this note from a doctor, and then I'm a man. I would like my government ID to be issued for me as a man. And so the woman behind the counter didn't know what the hell to do, why would she? And she phoned her supervisor, and her supervisor said, yeah, you could issue the ID, and so now she has ID as a man. So, wow. Yeah, wow is right. About 500,000 people have watched that online. So, scientists beware, because there's another thing that's built into this damn doctrine. So, it's worse than social constructionism. It's not even coherent social constructionism, because the social constructionists at least agree that human identity is a consequence, say, of the interaction between the individual and society. They take it one step further. So they dispense with biology, introduce social constructionism, and then immediately dispense even with social constructionism, saying that your identity is nothing but what you say it is. That's built into the law. And that means you can be anything you want. And so that means you can occupy any position on the so-called gender spectrum, and it's not a spectrum, by the way, it's a bimodal distribution with some small exceptions, technically speaking, but it doesn't matter, the spectrum's built into the law. And so they've actually undermined the concept of the objective world, because your identity is nothing but subjective. And so they're going to run into terrible trouble with that, because of course there are now 70 gender identities that are available on Facebook, and then there's the multiplication of these identities in a community called otherkins. And you'll hear a lot about otherkins. Yeah, it's not funny. It's so horrible and absurd that it's funny, like surreal. Surreal is funny, but the otherkins claim non-human identity, and that can be animal identity, bears. There's even a pronoun for people who identify as worms, and I'm not kidding. Worm self is the pronoun, and there's no reason under the doctrines that are now part and parcel of our law that those people cannot insist with exactly the same justification that you use their pronouns. And so it's bears, puppies. These are people who often have bears, puppies, kittens, deer, mice, lions, but worse, elves, fairies. Seriously, the LGBTQ has a Q plus now, and Q plus are the people who include the otherkins, and the otherkins are demanding non-human identity. But look, if identity is only subjective, if it's only your damn narrative that counts, and there's no such thing as the objective, which is what the postmodernists claim. That's what Jacques Derrida claims. And if you want to line up vicious, horrifying, nihilistic demonic philosophers, Jacques Derrida would be at the top of the list. He claims there's nothing outside of the text. Everything is interpretation, and all categorization is just a power game. And so this is now instantiated into the law. Your identity is what you subjectively construe. It's like, and from a psychological perspective, of course, that's absolute rubbish, because that isn't what your identity is at all. Your identity, at minimum, is something you negotiate with other people, and it's predicated on a biological platform. And you can tell that because if someone cuts you, you bleed. And that's the proof of the biological instantiation of human identity. But that's all irrelevant to these bloody social justice warriors and the idiot politicians who've now allowed them to instantiate their pernicious and philosophically primitive and nihilistic doctrine into the bloody foundations of our law. And that's where we're at in 2007.